One of the things that as we begin to see more of these technologies appear in FinTech, it gives us pause for thought. We're beginning to think about how we can use these things. Now, I realized myself that when I'm having conversations with people, quite often I look in the sky. And I was beginning to think, well, okay, maybe some people think that I don't like them in any way, that I don't connect with them. I looked at the brain research that there is, and it turns out that maybe there's this idea that there is the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, that you look different ways. It turns out I believe that's untrue. I think what actually happens when we're listening to things, we're beginning to have ideas, the reason why we look up in the sky is to not look at other people to give us more brain power. It actually turns out that to interact with other human beings, it takes a lot of brain power to look and think and everything else, whereas if you look in the sky, you can still see, you can still hear, you can still think, but it frees up a huge amount of processing to think about the future and to think about new great things. With that, I'd like to welcome on stage Michel from Eurogiro, and he's going to talk to us about will pool transactions become the new FinTech? Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Before I start, I would like to refer to a visit of Winston Churchill in, I believe it was in 1947 or 48, at my university town. And when he came there, he said, I feel tremendous forces in this room. Actually, I would like to say that I feel the same for this Webit conference. I mean, I've been in many conferences varying from Money 2020 to Cybos, well, what have you. But here, I think the organizers have been achieving a really great mixture between inspiration, really emotional appeal, and also quite a good dose of technical and financial activity. So I congratulate the organization for this. Now to my presentation. Actually, it's called Reversed Reach or Pool Transaction or Pool Payments. Will they become the new FinTech? Or basically, to turn it around, will pool transactions become the new FinTech? What is meant by this title? It seems to be a complex and a bit cryptical. And I've used this somewhat cryptical title mainly to rock some of the FinTech companies that are here out of their chair. You will soon find out in my presentation what this is all about. Actually, it is basically the story about empowering the recipients of a payment. And by that, I strive also to contribute a little bit to make the world a bit better. So, how do I look at the FinTech today? And I have to make the reservation that FinTech that I look at is predominantly focusing on the payments activities. So FinTech today, those who are focusing actually on the payments, are quite experienced in what I call, and that is depicted by the slide here on the screen, advanced piggyback riding. Why? Well, the payment industry is nowadays dominated by FinTech. Then new entrants who provide gadgets, and we've just heard the previous speaker about that, APIs, apps, etc., etc. In the FinTech landscape, there's an increasing number of service providers that focus on improving specific parts of the traditional universal banking model by using innovative technology. FinTech players focus on designing, building, and executing specific parts of the banking value chain in a better way, in a cheaper way, and in a faster way that is currently on offer by the banks. And the banks thank them for that. With this strategy, they are able to establish a market position for themselves in a specific niche. There's not a single large bank, by the way, that has not started also a study into the effects of FinTech, or some of them have even started a FinTech department or an incubator. Well, is that all? I don't think so. Let's look at the traditional flow of a transaction in the payments value chain. It shows the steps in the value chain. The payer or the sender of a payment uses the available channels to enter a payment transaction. The stored value, let me see if I can point that out. That is here. At the far left end, the stored value is his account or cash or any other form of value that can be stored, for example, on a mobile wallet. With the tools that the originator, which is basically the facilitator of this payment, could be a bank, is providing him, this consumer can enter his transaction. Wow. For example, this is done by utilizing the internet banking application of a bank. But more and more FinTech companies are active here to help execute this part of the value chain, like I said, better, cheaper, and faster than a bank. But still, it is only a very small part of the whole value chain, as you can see. Banks love this so that they do not have to develop all this themselves. And you see, today, we recognize that many of the FinTechs are here in that part, and they stay there. My view is that they can do better. Let's see why. Again, on this slide, this is the traditional payments value chain presented in another form, the so-called four-corner model, but it tells the same story. FinTechs are only active at a very small part of the value chain, helping consumers to access their stored value, like mobile wallet, bank account, etc., to generate a transaction. Again, my view is that it's not enough. Hopefully, you can still follow me. Well, here we see the traditional reach, where one channel is deciding the flow of the payment. My view is that it's not a very client-friendly way to do that in today's world. Once the payer has entered his payment, and the banks thank them for that, because the payer is now manually entering a transaction into the back office of a bank, helped by the FinTech companies. So once the payer has entered his payment, the originator bank decides how a transaction is routed, how slow or how fast. If you pay for it, the transaction is sent to a correspondent by using an infrastructure. And that could be, and that's the logo of my company in the middle, the infrastructure of Eurogiro. This correspondent is called the terminator. It's not Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it's called the terminator because the transaction basically terminates at the back office of this correspondent bank and is entered then into the stored value of the end consumer, the payee. Both the payer and the payee do not have much choice, and that's my point altogether today. The originator and the terminator decide the flow, the pace, and the cost of a transaction. And the consumer at both ends, so the sender and the receiver, don't have too much of a choice. Now, the traditional reach empowers predominantly the originator, so the bank of the one who sends the transaction, or the financial institution, I should say. He decides where the payment lands, as he is the only one who can route the transaction. In the situation of what I call empowered receivers, the terminator can create what we call receiving reach. They reach out to different originators, vis-à-vis the one that I just described in the earlier slides, different originators that have now appeared to enable their clients to receive transactions from various parties instead of the original, mostly single, traditional party. This may all, and this is a very complex slide, I apologize, that probably not everybody, especially in the back of the room, can see that. but it is depicting the following. It's called payer reach. Again, this may all seem simpler than it is. If payees have multiple providers, the challenge, of course, is creating payer reach for the receiving providers in a hugely challenging and competitive environment. It is not easy, as terminators need to make different agreements with different parties versus the good old correspondent banking where you were very at ease with your friends, the old boys network. Now, in a situation of full reverse reach, the terminator organizes its own receiving reach, as you can see here, by funneling originating parties and online front ends. And that is quite a complex way to do it, but it's all meant to empower the receiver of the transaction. So now, to go back to the good old payments value chain that I showed at the beginning. A significant step forward towards an ideal world would look like this: a combination of a push transaction arranged by the originator and a pull transaction arranged by the terminator, thereby empowering not only the sender of the transaction, but getting the receiver at the same level. Maybe a few words about that. My view is that a receiver, nowadays, customers of my clients have sometimes to walk 2 or 3 hours to get to their payment, to a post office, to a bank, or in any other way to get their money. The whole thing about this reverse reach is my view on empowering the recipient of a transaction so that he or she can tell, hey, send me money through this channel because that's much easier for me. That's the contribution to a better world, I think. And it's not basically that pool transactions are just a figment of my imagination. Already several smart guys have started providing these services. For example, Accept Email, where a supplier can send an email which contains all necessary elements of a payment transaction that upon receipt by the payee is providing him to only authorize the payment rather than to just step in all these elements of a payment. Of course, the novelty is twofold here. The payer does not have to enter the payment details in the environment of his financial institution, and the payee receives the transaction only through the channel and at the designated account or stored value that he indicates. And it works. Another example is a closed-loop solution in the request payment button option in the Danish SWIP app. The recipient just taps the button to request payment from one of the contacts in his application. My last slide is the message for the fintechs. So to summarize my presentation, dear fintechs, please do also focus on helping to empower the receiver of a transaction. And by doing so, by helping to create reverse reach, helping to make receivers define how, when, and where they receive funds that are due to them, instead of letting the originator decide where the payment will land eventually. Thank you very much.